Hello, I think we're good to go. Welcome guys to the Vast Vision Campfire Storytellers Convention. My name is Rob Guillory. I'm the writer and artist of such comics as Shoe and Farmhand for Image Comics and Mosley over at Boom Studios, and I'm going to be your host for this particular section of the con. So this is going to be a free-flowing, very laid-back 1 hour chat. Shout out to anyone who's on the Vast Vision Discord or on YouTube tuning into it. If you happen to be a member of the Vast Vision Discord, please feel free to drop in any questions for our guests today in the Campfire live chat. I will try to leave some space at the end just to get to the Q&A. All right, our guest for today probably does not need much of an introduction. He is an extremely prolific artist of such comics as Joe the Barbarian with Grant Morrison, Tokyo Ghost with Rick Remender, Chrononauts with Mark Millar. He's also a prolific writer. He does double duty as writer artist on such books as Punk Rock Jesus and the smash hit Batman White Knight series. And recently, he's been doing a whole new thing, paving a completely different road to success in the crowdfunding world with books like The Plot Holes and Zorro, Man of the Dead. Sean is, of course, also a lover of cool cars, motorcycles, and I think from our previous conversation, he just might be one of the sharpest minds working in comics today. So our guest today is, of course, Sean Murphy. What's up, Sean?
Yeah. Dude, thank you. Again, I gotta bring you on the road with me, man. You're like my flavor player, my hype man.
I will be your hype man. I will wear the giant clock and be your guy.
Yeah, I think it's
Cool.
cool to. I don't think I've been interviewed by an artist before, and I might have, but no one is as big as you are. So I think it'll be really interesting to have a conversation because you sort of speak the same language that I do.
Yeah, I was actually, I full disclosure, I had no idea I was going to be interviewing you until a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And when
Sorry.
they asked me, I said, "Really?" Like I immediately got a little panicky. But then I started thinking about every conversation you and I have had in the past, off record, and it's
Yeah.
always been. I think the first time we met was at the I think it was at Bob Shaw's comic shop in
Yep.
Merrimack, like
Yeah.
6 years ago or something. And
Yeah.
we just ended up. I just met you there, and we ended up having this great, thoughtful discussion about all kinds of things. So
Yeah,
I
man.
knew that I knew this was going to work.
Yeah, no, you're my favorite type of artist. You're humble, you're thoughtful, you're hardworking, you're good at business. You don't seem to be like a complainer. You seem to be a solutions oriented type of guy. Yeah, honestly, I'm excited to chat. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely, man. So right off the bat, let's just start at the beginning. I mean, where'd you come from? Who is Sean Murphy?
I was born and raised in New England. I always had aptitude for art, and my parents were pretty supportive, which was helpful. They were both business people, so they weren't so sure they wanted to send me to art school and get a liberal arts degree. But if I could make a living at it and be professional about it, then they were all on board. So they helped enroll me in private classes when I was like ages 8 to 18. I had a teacher who was an ex World War II Marine. He used to do illustrations and stuff, paintings for the local, illustrations for the local paper and cartooning. And he was one of the first teachers I had that thought comic book art was art. Back then, there was a real resistance to, I was drawing pictures of guys with guns and gargoyles and Batman, and my high school teachers, they probably thought it was good, but it wasn't really art. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So he was really helpful. His name was Leslie Swank. He passed away a few years ago. I spoke at his funeral. But yeah, he was also really hardcore, as a Marine tends to be. And, you know, he was like a tough love type of teacher. And when I teach, and it's not often, I tend to be like a tough love type of teacher too, which isn't always compatible with, especially some younger students. So,
Mm.
yeah. But anyway, from there I went to Mass College of Art, and then I transferred to Savannah College of Art in Georgia. I took a couple of there was a club that started at night, and I was probably ahead of the curve as far as skills, and I was really impatient. I was probably really hard to teach for a professor.
Mm.
Very frustrated. Like I'd get the assignment done, and other students it would take like 4 extra weeks, and I, doing like 3 hour critiques on art class. It's just, it was so hard, frustrating, especially for people that really weren't trying. It's got to be tough to be a teacher, to have to teach to the middle. Like, what do you do with the kids that are ahead or the kids that are behind? Like, I get it. But anyway, I hooked up with some friends. They took me to my first convention, which is MegaCon. I didn't know what a convention was. So I arrived and I was looking down on the floor and I saw what looks like a comic book yard sale with editors there. So I was like, okay, I get this. I know how to network. And, my business skills kind of kicked in, and I took some phone numbers and data and email and, kept updating my files with my connections in comics, kind of the light touch, be the squeaky wheel, don't be extra, don't be overboard, and, don't be obnoxious with people. And just kept plugging away on my craft. And it took me about 8 years of struggling in comics, making very little money. Like 1 year I only made $3,000. And then finally in 2009, I started getting more traction when Vertigo Comics hired me to work with Grant Morrison. And that was the book where I really I planted my flag, because I had been struggling in the industry for years and I didn't want to do another book and then disappear again. So I'm like, I'm going to make this book work. I don't freaking care what the script is. I'm going to just do the best I can on art to try to be undeniably talented so that people won't forget about me again. And it was sort of a new mindset that I adapted. And that book sort of put me on the map. And then from then on, I did books like Hellblazer. I met Scott Snyder, some American Vampire. I had a lot of the big writers kind of circling me, trying to get me to do books and stuff. It was really a question of who had a script available when, what was the page rate, trying to find projects that would highlight me or spotlight me in the right way. Like I did a Teen Titans book once that I'm not a good fit for Teen Titans. And I enjoyed drawing it. I'm happy for the paycheck, but that book didn't do anything for me. That's okay. And it wasn't until I got stuff like Tokyo Ghost. So I'm like, okay, this is up my alley. Any kind of steampunky thing, sci-fi, but I can sink my teeth into that. And I think it's interesting. Certain artists can tackle certain genres, but there's probably others that you should avoid, depending on taste.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. I mean, just listening, kind of you work through everything. It's interesting, because, like I said, we've spoken before. There's a lot I don't know about you, but I immediately knowing you, just the few times we've spoken, the thing that always jumps out about you is there is always a sense that you're intentional in what you choose to take, and what you actually choose to do. And I guess I'm curious, was that something that came from like your family? Was that something you saw modeled in your family? Was that something you just kind of innately just came out of you?
Yeah, I remember I was with my dad, and he was going to buy me a car. So we went onto the lot. It was a used Honda CRX, still one of the best cars I've ever owned. And I was really excited. And he said, I want you to stay in the car. I feel like if they see you're excited, they're not going to lower the price for us. So I said, well, what if I pretend to not want it? Because there's a similar car, 2 doors down. I'll play I guess the bad cop in a way, and he'll be the good cop. And he was like, that'll work. And then he gave me a few pointers. And I think what I learned from him was the world is going to show you the front door. Marvel and DC are going to say, sit down for these portfolio reviews. This is the system we have. But I learned from him, my father, that there's always a side door and a back door. It's just a matter of finding it. So I think just being around that influence and knowing how the game is played helped me fight for my worth, ask for raises, push back on contracts. And comics generally will, I don't know if it's intended or not, but they'll try to make you feel grateful that you're even there. Like, oh, you don't need a raise. We gave you Deadpool. Who likes Deadpool? They will do that. And then it mostly works, honestly, because there's not a lot of capital. to go around.
Mm,
You got a lot of people fighting for a slice of the pie.
mm,
But if you're good and you're direct, and you know your value, and you are not a jerk, I think
mm,
there's ways to negotiate contracts. Even if they can't pay more, maybe they can give you more back end or different royalties or
mm,
whatever.
mm,
So I realized that that was something that my family taught me that is really hard to teach a lot of
mm.
insecure artists. Because
Yeah,
I've given this lecture and a lot of artists will nod, but they won't do it. It's just not
yeah.
in their nature. And that's okay.
Mm,
Like I'm happy to help people that are on the brink of being able to do that. But a lot of people, they're just not wired that way.
yeah, yeah. No, I was totally the kid who was not wired that way. I mean, my parents were very blue collar, very hard workers. I
Yeah.
definitely inherited that from them, but I think it didn't dawn on me. I was super introverted, very, very painfully introverted. But there was a switch that happened in my life. The first convention I went to, actually, I guess the second one. The first one I went to, I got my first portfolio review. Super shy, but it went well. Second show I went to, I remember walking into the show. It was the first time I had a portfolio. I went there specifically to get feedback. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember walking in, and the first table I went to was some indie comic publisher, some editor. And he
Yeah.
saw that I had a portfolio and said, "Hey, can I look through your stuff?" And I remember this moment where a switch flipped. And for whatever reason, I like the introvert side of me went away, and this other
Mm-hmm.
part switched on, and I became
Yeah.
really like okay with like I was just dead focused on this thing, and it's just really
Yeah.
cool. That's what your story reminded me of. This idea of, when you started going to shows, there was this intentionality. You had the
Yeah.
wisdom to kind of um, recognize it was an art form, but also there was a business aspect to it. You had it demonstrated through your parents that there is a
Yeah.
you are worth advocating for,
Right.
which is hard. I mean, a lot of creators, myself included in the early years, really had a hard time dealing with that.
Yeah. It's sort of, I think any creator who works at home all the time, who thinks that their art or their writing or whatever is valuable, you have to have an ego. You have to believe that you're a little better than you are. You have to be a little bit Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
But you also need to know how to shut it down and be blue collar. Be like, listen, I've got a ton of opinions about how Batman should be drawn, but my landscaper isn't going to give a shit, because the world needs to turn. And as important as Batman is, world probably doesn't need Batman, but the world needs contractors and electricians and normal blue collar jobs. And I really respect the blue collar mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It makes, I mean, I don't know how you are, but it sort of makes me uncomfortable when someone comes up to me at a convention and just unloads all the stuff that they love about my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my job is to get them to get it out of their system and then
Yeah.
Bring us to equal level. Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be famous and they're not. I just would rather us both be two guys at comic convention. So if I can
Yeah.
break someone down quickly, that's sort of what I try to do. Because I don't need the hero worship. Are you
Yeah.
kind of the same way?
It gets I've had some people cry on me here and there.
Mm.
It's interesting. I mean, the first time
Yeah.
I have the most extreme experience I've seen, and it didn't happen to me, but I was there when I saw it, when I saw it happen. Um, James O'Barr, who created The Crow,
Yeah.
I was sitting next to him at a show in Jekyll Island. Where was that? Atlanta, I think.
Yeah.
And we're just hanging out, just little show, and James is a very big character, and I'm just hanging out and I'm watching people come by, talk to him, and this one guy comes up to him and just starts sobbing on him, just starts
Yeah.
crying, and
Yeah.
it was interesting because I knew that story had a big impact on people,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess what I experienced in my early years, I'm still pretty young in this industry. I've been in it 15, a little over 15 years, but I
Mm-hmm.
still feel like a baby in it for the most part. But I've been blown away at how much when you plan a story out there, it
Mm-hmm.
goes beyond you. Like you don't know where it's going to go,
Yeah.
and you don't know how it's going to have hit people. So
Yeah.
it makes me uncomfortable on one hand, but at the same time, I've got
Yeah.
emails from people. I got an email from a guy who said, we read Shoe, and me and my dad fought our entire
Hmm.
lives,
Right.
and the only thing we could connect on was Chew, and he just
Yeah.
passed away. He passed away last week. I just want to let you know, thank you for making
Yeah.
this thing that we could finally connect on. And
Right.
that's crazy. You know, the
Yeah.
effect that could have. That's something we make by ourselves in our offices. You know, 14 hours a
Yeah.
day goes away, like goes out and does things.
Yeah. It's hard to wrap your head around it because on day one, you're getting up at Monday, you're in your underwear or in your robe, drawing a silly comic book page. Um, and then day two, you get a call and maybe someone wants to turn that into a movie. And you're thinking about red carpet events and who's going to play the main character. A guy who's working alone at home in his underwear and a robe is not equipped to think about that stuff. You know, it's two completely different worlds. Of course, people who are creative lose their minds when they get successful. You know, I mean, it takes a lot of, you got to touch grass to be able to maintain your work ethic and focus and not
Yeah.
let that stuff distract you. And
Yeah.
not everyone's wired that way, you know, and then throw in social media, which no one's trained for. You know, we
Yeah.
all learn by example, putting our foot in our mouths, you know, present company included a lot.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, especially, it's funny, James O'Barr, I like him a lot. I mean, The Crow was, you've got a movie and music, which touches people way more than the comic does sometimes. It was the sort of resurgence of the punk goth movement in the 90s. I mean, how much money did Hot Topics make on The Crow and still making today, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or in Tim Burton movies, you know? So when someone comes up to James O'Barr, they're loaded with all that stuff. And like, of course they're breaking down, you know? And, you know, you and I mean, I've had some reactions, not like that bad, but I should say not that good. Our books do touch people, but to be James O'Barr or Mike Mignola or someone, you know, Kirkman, you know, imagine the kinds of people that show up in their line, and there's 200 of them, and they're there for 2 hours, and it's like, great, one guy's done freaking out. Next guy, come on up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a crazy intimate relationship. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you don't know these people, but you hit them. Your story can hit someone so deeply in a way that sometimes your close, like, personal relationships don't hit you. You know, it's powerful. So backtrack kind of on that thread. What was there a particular moment where you first a formative encounter with story? Let's say like a movie, something you hit that hit you at a very young age that just
Yeah.
it bit you.
Yeah. I mean, my answer is similar to a lot of people my age. It would be Batman the Animated Series. You know, at the time, I was enjoying cartoons like, you know, He-Man, then Transformers, and G.I. Joe, and I liked that stuff. But when you were 12 years old, I was 12, so I started going through puberty and adolescence and started feeling things like I'd react emotionally to stories, and like there's something about Back to the Future. It's not just a fun movie with a car. There's this relationship with Doc Brown and Marty. Like, what is that? What am I not getting from He-Man? You know? And with Batman the Animated Series, I think it all coalesced into a fun, superhero-y, colorful story where Harley Quinn is out of jail. She's trying to follow the rules and go straight, but she's struggling. And Batman's trying to catch up, tell her, like, just relax, we gotta sort some stuff out. You're not going to jail, calm down. And she just keeps fighting him. And at the end, she does have to go back to rehab a little bit. And he gives her this dress that she was trying to buy at the beginning of the story. And he's like, I had a bad day too once. And my 12-year-old heart was like, oh, what was that? That was amazing. I remember I took Taekwondo too, so I had to leave and go to karate. And I remember doing like forms and just thinking like, what? That was amazing. And then we had to do sparring after, and I was telling this other kid, like, have you seen the animated series? Like, there's this moment with Harley Quinn. And he's like, who's Harley? Like, never mind. But yeah, it excited me so much that I kept chasing that feeling. Like, what is it about that turn that happened in that episode? Or, I mean, a bunch of different moments in different episodes. And then it turned into movies and, you know, Pulp Fiction and Shawshank Redemption and
Mm.
All that stuff. So I think I went from I want to draw like Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee uh, to I want to tell good stories. Um, but I don't want to sacrifice art either.
Mm.
Like I love the early '90s, but it was not a great time for storytelling.
Mm.
Is there a way to sort of bring some of that with me and have the art focus on the story and not just on splash pages?
Yeah, yeah. Was there a particular moment where you just talked about what hooked you? But was there a particular moment where you realized I'm actually pretty good at this? I mean, backstory for me, real quick. I
Yeah.
remember specifically being, I think I was in, I think I was in the first grade, and we had some like
Oh
kind of
yeah.
we had a coloring contest, and I wasn't even thinking about it, just like did a thing, and I won the
Yeah.
contest. And I won like some kind of like dumb plushy prize, and I
Yeah.
was completely shocked by it. And
Yeah.
from that point, there's several times where I would do things just naturally, not even trying,
Yeah.
and people
Yeah.
responded really strong. So, did you have any of those moments?
Yeah. That's fun. That's a good story, man. Yeah, I had a similar moment, I think, in preschool. We were just drawing with crayons and I was drawing a person and my mother came in to pick me up and the teacher said, your 5-year-old is the only one I've ever seen draw 5 stick figures on a hand. Most students
Oh.
just scribble or draw 3, but he knows that there are 5 fingers. He knows that the mouth
Mhm.
goes below the nose and the eyes, stupid things like that. So I
Mhm.
think you show that you're wired for it at an early age. And at that
Yeah,
point, do you have the support and the drive to keep going? You
yeah,
know, so
yeah.
part of it is a gift, but part of it is just sweat.
Right, right. And I guess kind of on that thread, you know, like I said, there's certain things that I did a little bit of research on you yesterday, and one of the parts of the story I didn't know about you that made tons of sense when I found out was that you were an apprentice yourself. And one of the first times you jumped out at me years ago was when you did your own apprenticeship for young
Yeah.
creators. And it just made so much sense. It's like, oh, okay, I totally get it. Was that something that how old were you when you started apprenticing under him?
I think I was 12 to 18.
Wow. Wow.
So it was
Is that some
92. Yeah, so
okay?
1992, that Batman the Animated Series. So I was into storytelling and I was taking art more seriously. And my parents found a local artist with
Mhm.
$6 for 2-hour classes, $6. It was
Wow.
cheap,
Wow.
and he knew his shit. He was from the South. He was a hunter. He made his own bullets. He made his own fishing lures.
Wow.
Hit shrapnel in his head from when he got blown up in the Pacific.
Hmm.
And my father really liked him because my father doesn't really like artsy fartsy frou frou people.
Hmm.
And they met this like hardcore, you know, old white guy in New Hampshire, and they're like $6 for 2 hours, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and he taught me like he had lessons every day. He wanted me to taught me about perspective. 1 point, 2 point. He put a brush in my hand at a young age and inked with a brush correctly and painting eventually. And you just go through the classes. I'm sitting there with like 8 other students who are each on their own timeline with what he's teaching them. But mostly it was just a lot of quiet time doing what he told us to do, and showing up next week.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean just it's funny just looking at the story, looking at everything you've said, your life up to this point, your parents, that parental support, their business backgrounds, you know,
Yeah,
uh Mr. Swank's, mentorship and who he was. Like
yeah,
it really feels like putting a puzzle together. It's like, oh,
yeah,
this explains a lot about
yeah,
why Sean is who
yeah.
he is and why I like Sean so much.
Oh yeah, well, thanks,
I
man.
got like
So it's
absolutely.
funny. He used to he would tell stories about World War II, and he used the word Japs all the time. But he loved Japanese people.
Hmm.
He's a 65, 70-year-old badass who they tried to kill him, and he was killing them.
Yeah. Right.
And I think they were, I don't know where they were. They were raiding Okinawa or somewhere on the
Okay.
mainland, and they went through some kind of factory, and there was all this porn. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it would be 1943, 44, right? I'm like,
Mhm.
were they creating porn in Japan drawing like porn manga back then. Like, what the hell was he talking about? But and he's like, the Japs are obsessed with porn. I mean, like, but later on he'd be like, they make the best cars, they make the best stuff. He had Japanese
Hmm.
students, but the word Jap just got in my brain. So as I was growing up, I thought it was like the word Jew. You could say the word
Hmm.
Jew. And even now, when I talk about Japanese stuff, I might slip and say Jap, and people are like, "What, dude? You can't say that word." Like, I'm sorry, like the old guy that taught me, it wasn't supposed to correct.
Well, you take the good with the bad. Take the good with the bad.
Yeah, right.
So why comics? Of all the types of storytelling you could have gone into, why comics?
I'm curious to see what you answer for this too.
Mm,
I started reading comics sort of later, maybe when I was like 11 or 12. I hit yard sales. In New Hampshire, we didn't really have comic shops. So I would get old stuff, like Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man. I remember collecting that.
mm,
But I was more interested in the drawing and the art, not really care about the story. Like, I would pick up a comic and I would see how many panels had Spider-Man swinging around, and
mm,
I'd go home and trace those drawings. Um, so I didn't know about X-Men, really, Fantastic Four. I wasn't like a fan of the lore. I
mm,
was into it for the visuals, and I enjoyed drawing, and I enjoy a challenge. And I guess I would describe myself now as like the sort of artist who's more of a frustrated filmmaker, where
mm,
I sort of think about comics as movies. And when I think
mm,
about stories and scripts, I think about my favorite movies. I think of, page space as equal to film time. I think
mm,
about screenplays like 3 act structures, beginning, middle, end. You know the ending of your story before you start the beginning. You don't just
mm,
wander through like you do when you're writing a novel.
mm,
Like, efficiency is sort of what I like about it. And editing, cutting back, and really being careful how many words you're using. Can you edit anything else down? Like,
mm,
one criticism of my own stories is that they move so fast, they don't really stop and let you breathe, which is
mm,
maybe something I need to be better at, honestly. Like, I'm always happy to
mm,
learn.
mm,
Yeah, like when people ask me about what do I think about Batman stuff, about the lore, I'm embarrassed to say, like, I don't know. I didn't know Batman's first appearance, and someone got mad at me. And they're like, "How do you get to have your own Batman universe and not know these things? Like, it's not fair."
yeah.
And they're not wrong. Like, I get it. It's. But I guess I just came at it from, like, I love drawing. I love moving the camera around, and comics is kind of my excuse. It's sort of like
Mm,
doing a movie where you just need like 5 people. You don't need
yeah.
1,000 people to film something. And
Mm,
you can set the story wherever you want. You can write an action scene, I don't need to get approval from a city to do an explosion like
right.
Christopher Nolan.
Mm,
Yeah, it's a lot of power there, and I
yeah.
really love what it can do. But at the same time, you know, video games and movies are kicking our asses right now, and
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like we're working on a dying medium in some ways.
Mm, yeah. I
Are you
talk
a
to a
comic
lot of
book?
comic creators. What's that?
Were you like a big X-Men
Mm,
fan, or so you knew a lot
yeah.
about the lore and stuff? Because you doing
Uh,
mostly indie stuff, I thought maybe you could
mm.
go either way.
No, I actually well, I fell in love with comics purely because I mean, I was a visual kid right from the beginning. I just
Mhm.
was really into the stuff, and I'm a child of the '80s, so everything's Thundercats and everything else. I was
Yeah.
probably way more into animation, but I did love comics, and I had a couple uncles who were very very influential over my life. I mean, they were both
Right.
gigantic. I call them the prototypical comic geeks. I mean, they
Yeah.
were super into it, and comics
Yeah.
honestly went back even further. My grandfather's brother, who's passed now, he was a Vietnam vet. He
Hmm.
actually was a huge comic fan. He collected back in the '60s, so he had everything you could think of, all the old stuff. And my uncles picked them up, and I just remember going over to my uncles' houses, and they had this giant suitcase in the closet with comics in it, and it's just everything you could think of, like John Byrne, X Men, and Chris Claremont stuff, and George Perez Teen Titans, and I think Dreadstar was in there. Like it's just everything you could think of. X-Men. And I
Wow.
just before I knew how to read, I was in it. I just loved the medium, and I would
Yeah.
come across it everywhere. I mean, back then, some of my first comics were not even like X-Men or any of that stuff. It was like I remember getting like I feel like everyone had a comic. Like Kool-Aid had a comic, and at some
Yeah.
point, like one of my first
Yeah.
comics was a Kool-Aid comic, and
Wow.
the main character is like this guy who's made out of fire who's just making everyone thirsty, and and for whatever reason, like when you get thirsty, Kool-Aid is not what you want, but this is the
Yeah.
comic, and
Yeah.
I absolutely fell in love with the medium, and I
Yeah.
just it was the best. I don't. There was almost no barrier to entry for me.
Hmm.
I mean, growing up in the South, we had nothing back then, and there was no internet to go with it.
Yeah.
So comics for me at least were a this otherworldly, like it was so far away, it didn't seem like something that I didn't even think of it as a real job people had
Yeah.
until I was in college. But it was so at the same time accessible because I didn't need to go to film school to do it.
Yeah.
I was in fourth grade hanging out with buddies whenever Rob Liefeld drew Cable for the first time,
Yeah.
and we were freaking out. Like there's like this span of time in
Yeah.
the early '90s where it's like, Cable was created, Bishop was created, Mark Silvestri's on X-Men,
Yeah.
Image is
Yeah.
founded, all this crazy stuff's going on. And at some point, I just decided I'm going to go home and make a comic, and I
Yeah.
just took some pink construction paper. That's what I had.
Pink. All
Folded it
right.
pink, pink. Folded it in half with a ballpoint pen, and just
Yeah.
drew a comic in a day. And I drew dozens of those things, and just
Wow.
fell in love with it, and it just stuck.
Did you draw backgrounds and finish stories, or did you draw mostly like panels with pinups?
Oh, it's kind calling them panels. That's being
Got it.
kind.
Okay.
They were it was purely just pure action focused.
Got it.
Everything was a fight. Everything was a fight.
Of course.
Um, yeah, absolutely. It was all guns and fighting and giant monsters
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, you just fell in love with the thing.
I want to go back to that Kool-Aid comic for a second. Um, First of all, if you have pink construction paper, that's the right color to use for Kool-Aid. Um, this is a good idea for a podcast, is you and I will go and find these guys from the 70s and ask them, like, tell us about this obscure comic. Like, no one's ever interviewed him about Kool-Aid. I would
Right.
love to know the look on his face when he got that call. Was he like, honey, I'm getting paid to draw comics? And then he's like, fuck, how does the Kool-Aid guy move around?
Right,
Did he
right.
hate it? Was he pulling his hair out? Was he like, it's just a job, it's just a job, it's just a job? And I remember Kool-Aid had video. They made a video game for like ColecoVision. It
Mm.
was stupid. I remember him bursting through a wall, and it was terrible. Um, I really love those kinds of stories because I feel like an
Mm.
interview like that, the guy would say stuff you were never expecting.
Yeah.
Assuming he's still alive and didn't put a bullet in his head after that.
And I mean, and to their credit, I have to say
Yeah,
that even back then, on a licensed silly thing like a Kool-Aid, I remember I had a Jello comic too. Jello had a
yeah,
comic. They had their own superhero and all this stuff. And
yeah,
even on something as silly as that, the
yeah,
craftsmanship was actually very well done.
yeah. I'm with you, man. I remember
Yeah.
buying a comic for the Pirates of Darkwater. Uh,
Mm.
I think I've got it at Suncoast Video in the mall. Yeah. And I still have it. I'm looking at the art. I'm like, this guy is really good. What the hell was
Yeah.
he doing licensed books for? Like, I would have put him on X-Men or something. But I think his style was unusual for the early 90s, and
Mm.
licensed books was all he could get, and it's such a shame. But you're to your point, some of these oddball comics that came out, um, some of the illustrators were solid, honestly.
Mhm.
They must have
Mhm.
been very annoyed that they weren't getting the good gigs. They were getting stuck on Kool-Aid, or maybe they loved it. I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
know.
So kind of on that thread, you've dipped your toes all over the place. You've done really pretty personal creator-owned stuff. You've done licensed stuff. Um, is there, I guess at the bottom, is there a particular, what is your favorite type of story to tell and why?
I think I go for visuals.
Mm.
I need to know what the set looks like. Is there a car chase? Who the main character is? The genre, I think, gets me excited. It's not so much about character, because that will come. Character is great when you're writing a script, but it takes me a week to write a script, and then it takes me a month or a month and a half to draw it. So when I'm drawing, I'm not really thinking about character as much anymore. I'm thinking about camera blocking and shadows and stuff. So because most of my time is going to be spent making the book, it's, drawing the book, I think I just need to know the visuals or what I want. So, I don't generally go to horror type stuff because I don't like drawing blood and guts and torture porn type stuff. But I'm good for like a Castlevania type story where a guy with a whip goes into a castle and kicks some ass. Like, yeah, I'm down with that. I'll draw a cemetery every now and then. But yeah, for me, it has to be about the visuals. I don't like silly stories. I don't like stories that don't make any sense to me. The thing that made me want to start writing was I kept getting scripts that I didn't love. And I thought, man, I'm not a great writer, but I could at least write this, And the thing I say, which pisses off my writing friends, is if everyone in comics was Ernest Hemingway, I wouldn't be writing, And the other bit of wisdom is, have you ever read a shitty comic? Yeah. Can you write better than shitty? Probably. So I wish artists would try, A lot of the heavy lifting is the art. So for me, I think of myself as a B-level writer. But if I could draw it and do an A-level story with A-level art, then I can fool people, And I think that's what Mignola does, and he writes to his strengths and it works. The package just makes sense. I don't see Mignola writing, an X-Men event with 16 other writers at all, but, if you're one guy doing one book, you can kind of mold that piece of clay into something.
Is there a difference in your approach, or what are the differences, if there are any, in your approach to writing something like a Punk Rock Jesus, or even I found some of your old work on something called Off Road?
Oh yeah.
Versus something like a Batman. What's the difference?
Yeah, well, playing in someone else's sandbox has got a different set of rules. Whereas, doing your own thing, some people love to be free to do whatever they want. Some people love rules. So, Batman, you can't have him use a gun. You can't have him kill people. You can have some blood, but, this is a character that belongs to your readers. And you need to have a story that is what you give them what they want, but then a few unexpected surprises that they'll love, that phrase, what's that expression? Don't give your readers what they want, give them what they need. I hate that. Like, I know what that's trying to say, but that sort of allows the writer to ignore what his readers are saying. And I don't think you should do that. I think you should listen to your readers and listen to what they're not saying. I think you should get in their heads and be like, all right, I think I know what you want. I'm going to give you a few surprises. Like, let me come back with you with a comic that I think you're going to love. It's going to check your boxes, but there's going to be a few twists in there, and I think it's really fun and challenging to take a character like Batman and try to reinvent it in some way after, 80 years. And then, doing my creator-owned stuff, doing whatever I want. I don't know. It's so freeing. It can be intimidating. Especially, with Punk Rock Jesus, I was attacking religion. I was doing stuff. Like, I did a book that was put out by AOL Time Warner that said, I'm a Jesus. Hey, America, go fuck yourself. And that's the thing. Like, I don't know how I managed to pitch that book and get them to agree to do it and get the freedom to do what I wanted like that, to a giant corporation. Vertigo is sort of the evil stepchild of DC, so it's safer bet for Vertigo. But some of the career successes I've had, I don't think people even understand why that was a big deal at the time. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but even when I got the rights to Zorro, I don't think any normally a character like Zorro should be licensed by a company, like a real company,
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
one guy in his robe, in his underwear, in his office, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So when I got Zorro, which isn't a character people care about as much anymore, like I get that, but I love him. And I was telling my wife about what's going on. She's like, "Man, this is a big deal. Like, you're going to write articles and stuff." And I'm like, "No, they're not." Like, I don't think most people know enough about the business to know why this is a big deal. You know, they're like,
Right.
"Okay, Sean's doing Zorro, whatever. You know, what's happening with X-Men? You know, when is he going to get back on to Batman?"
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a delicate balance. I think there is definitely a line, at least for me. I've had this discussion with a lot of comic creators. This idea
Yeah.
of, you want to have, you want to tell that story that you feel really passionate about, but there is
Mm-hmm.
also the business aspect of it. There is a sort of, you know, for lack of a better term, the fan service aspect of it, and it's something
Yeah.
that, I mean, even back with when I was just starting out with Chew, Chew was very, very, very fan servicey in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways. And it wasn't that we bent the story around our fan base. There was always a plot that we were working toward.
Yeah.
It's just at some point when you start knowing, and I wrestled with this for a long time. When you start noticing that people are actually reading and paying attention to what you're making, and that this will be in someone else's hand, it's
Yeah.
it's it feels almost wrong not to acknowledge them to some degree, because it's
Right.
like, hey, I see
Yeah.
you. Like, I see you, and like, I'm going to give you something because I know you're going to like this. You know?
Do you have an example in Chew when you did that?
Oh, constantly. I mean, it was so one of the things that fans really loved about Chew was this, not something I expected, but it was the Easter egg aspect to it, where you
Yeah.
could read it, and there were all these little background gags and little threads throughout that I initially just started throwing in because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I saw Dave Gibbons do that a lot in Watchmen. Jim LaFou does that a ton in his work. Dave Crosland.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought it made for a really rich reading experience, because every time you could pick
Yeah.
it up, you could find something new, and it just, it made you feel like you were getting a bit more for your buck.
Yeah.
So I started doing that with Chew, and initially,
Yeah.
when I started Chew, I was so kind of low self-esteem, insecure, that I didn't. I just kind of like slipped a couple in here and there, and then we
Yeah.
started getting feedback from people. People would email and say, "Man, I really love that Shawshank Redemption joke in the background of whatever." And half
Yeah.
the time, my writer, John Layman, had no idea I was doing most of this stuff. He just missed it.
Got it.
So I would just slip it in. And eventually it became such a thing that it was just expected. And I had fun doing it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're spending 14 hours a day behind a drawing desk, you
Yeah.
just start kind of like entertaining yourself at some degree at some point.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Right. Right. So I think of something like, I think what one of the examples of something that I think toes that line really well is something like Spider-Verse. I think
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Verse, the movies, I think that they are very corporate, but at the same time, I think that they're really, really sincere. And I think
Yeah.
it's the perfect line
Yeah.
that it walks that line perfectly. And I think the reaction
Yeah.
to it is because of that.
Yeah. I think you and I were talking about this on the phone last time, where I think you can have your artistic integrity and be commercially viable at the same time. I think you
Mm-hmm.
can have integrity and sell out at the same time. Um, and I use the phrase sell out not in a negative way, just making something to sell out.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about Spider-Verse, you know, yeah, it's somewhat by the numbers and it's giving fans what they want and it's designed to make a lot of money. But, Miles Morales is so huge now to a whole new
Mm-hmm.
set of readers, which, we didn't have that before. Very few things in comics actually get new readers. As much as we pretend that we're good at this, we're not. And Miles Morales was a hit, and that movie made it cool. I mean, the infusion of fucking hip hop. You have a movie where there are literally word balloons over people's heads. Insane.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a Jurassic Park moment for me. And when the
Mm-hmm.
T-Rex comes out, and you're like, oh my god, things are different now.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spider-Verse is so important for so many reasons. And the fan service is there. I mean, if you're a big fan, you'll love it. If you're a casual fan, you'll love it. If you're a kid, you'll love it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that is, I wish it had won like best picture of the year. Honestly, it was such an important movie.
Totally, totally. So, and this is the, I guess the big question. This is it's the one I've been saving for the end that I wonder if maybe I should have led with this question.
Okay.
So this whole thing, this entire convention, everything is centering on the idea of story. And obviously we're storytellers. Right now, we live in a really interesting time where I was thinking about this morning. Like, the word narrative gets thrown around so much nowadays,
Right.
more than really at any point I could ever recall in my entire life. Like, there's phrases like, controlling the narrative or pushing the narrative. It's entered our lexicon now, and it feels like people are more aware, even maybe subconsciously, maybe not, that the stories that we tell ourselves are actually pretty important to how we live. So,
Mhm.
what do you think is the role of a storyteller in this society where narrative is like literally being fought over? Where do we as storytellers fit in this thing? That's big, right?
Oh man. Uh, if you started with that, we would have gone off the deep end and
I know.
been having a discussion only five people would have stuck around for. Yeah. Would you have an answer for that? Like a quick, your own opinion of it, so I can
Oh man.
like what kind of answer you want?
No, I think, how would I answer that question? I think people do look to storytellers, and I think this is one of the tensions of today. I think that people have historically looked to storytellers as if they see something that other people don't see,
I agree.
and there's a level of illumination there. And I think what's been hard over the last decade or so is that there is this sort of this fear to just like press into that, because historically when you speak, there's a danger that you'll be punched in the mouth.
Got it.
Especially as a storyteller. So that's a big question. Yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah. Okay. So that's helpful. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about being censored and what truth is, capital T or lowercase t, uh, and what the role of fiction is when things seem pretty scary in the world. Um, if people go to storytelling to help them digest events in their life around them, like there's a lot of truth in Shawshank Redemption for a lot of guys I know. It's different for every guy, but there's something in there that just sticks with them, and what that movie has to say about sadness, unfairness, the human condition, honor. Those are truths to people. And I think it's helpful to have stories that remind people, gives them something to think about, their own values. When you see something scary on the news, Trump, Israel, Hillary, whatever political side you're on, it's so cheap. The 24-hour news cycle is overwhelming. Facebook is a burden. Social media is often toxic. We're all doped up on this drug. We don't even realize what it's doing to us. We don't know what childhood abuse or bullying online leads to, because it's very new. Like we're all dealing with this new drug called social media, and it's dividing us at the kitchen table on Thanksgiving in a way that it never did before. And I generally think that most people in this country are good people most of the time, and I think a lot of them are being misled here and there on both sides. And I would like to think as narrators, as storytellers, our job is to entertain them first and foremost, make them feel like they're getting their money's worth. If they spend an hour reading Chew or reading Batman, they're going to be happy. And if we're giving them some peace and some distraction, I think that's great. But I also feel the responsibility to give them a little bit of nutrition. I feel like a comic book it should almost be like nutrition table on the side, where most comics are mostly sugar, probably just guys punching each other, guns going off. But every now and then, X-Men managed to say something about not being accepted, and X-Men means a lot to LGBT for these reasons. So there's some nice vitamins in that comic too, So the nutritional content, like, yeah, it's probably going to be mostly sugar in comics, but I try to think of like where I can inject nutrition, whether it's something to say about religion for Punk Rock Jesus, or in volume 3 of White Knight, talking about police and good cops versus bad cops, and trying to step over the laser beams to, in a world that's post George Floyd, how do you make a story about police in Gotham that doesn't trigger both sides, and it's a fun challenge. But I think that I can say what I want about cops in my story and have liberals like it and conservatives like it. Like, there's characters in there for both sides. And I think that's the trick to, especially when you're writing about politics. So anyway, I kind of wandered around at a few topics there. But yeah, you asked a really, really good, really big question that's important.
Yeah.
And narrative narrative is one of those words. It's such a vague word, like storytelling. Like, I was thinking about what is storytelling really? Like, people throw it around all the time, but I don't think it kind of needs to be redefined every now and then. And I think storytelling can be broken down. Like, when you're telling a story, you're acting, your character's facial expression, that's telling a story. What setting do you, is it like a dark alleyway, or is it a lit classroom? That tells a story. Symbolism, raining. The rain means depression. The character is really small, and the forest is really big. That's fear. That's symbolic. And you can break storytelling down into different subcategories, which I think are more helpful. But when you were asking me about narrative, I was trying to break down narrative, and I'm like, man, I don't even know. The topic.
Absolutely. Well, let me take a look. We have a few minutes left. Let me take a quick look in the chat and see if there's anything popping up. Comment. I see lots of memes.
Nice. Hopefully mostly positive. People upset that I said the word, because otherwise Japanese people are upset at me.
No, not yet.
Okay, good.
Awesome. Well, let's see. Stuff's still coming in. I'll roll into something else. What? And this is sort of like
I got a question for you too. After,
shoot.
You go first.
Okay, I was gonna say, and this is sort of, I'm sort of trying to frame these more in-depth questions with more like inside the actor studio type questions, just for fun. What kind of storyteller do you want to be remembered as?
Yeah, I want to be seen as Sean Murphy, who died tragically driving his car somewhere stupid, would be known for sort of making Batman accountable. He wrote a Batman story where Batman was in the real world answering to real viability questions about all the destruction and the emotional damage that he does, but didn't make him the bad guy. Like, we're still rooting for him. I think that Sean managed to lean into some heavy topics and make some solid points without abandoning people. I think that's sort of what my writing career is with Punk Rock Jesus to Batman. Is I don't shy away from political topics, and I know enough about both sides to step over the laser beams very carefully. And I know that's really hard for writers to do. I mean, a lot of writers are in their own bubble. The world is different to them, and I wish more people would get out and talk to people that they don't agree with.
Right.
I think it'll make you a better storyteller.
Absolutely.
What do you want?
Yeah, I've had this.
What do you want? Yeah.
Oh, my what do I want to be remembered for?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I wasn't ready to answer that question.
Sorry.
I don't know. I think I would like to. One of the things that drew me to storytelling in general, I think, more than any particular medium was just this idea of you get to touch somebody, like there's a level of like I was probably a bigger stand-up comedy guy as a kid than I was, comics. My parents used to listen to like Richard Pryor vinyl
Nice.
and
Yeah.
Eddie Murphy vinyl and that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated. And I would do my own stand-up in front of buddies here and there and just kind of like love when they laugh and that sort of thing. So I think the hope would be that I would be remembered as someone who enriched and made people feel,
Hmm.
and kind of added something positive in the end, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
I can't complain. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have I have two questions that just came in real quick.
Okay.
The first is sort of building on what you just talked about a while ago. So, Sean, you've clearly built an empire. Do you have any ideas on what to do when building an audience today while trying to avoid using outrage to gen up an audience? Because, of course, that tends to get people's attention.
Yeah. Man, um, I did gen up outrage, but I wasn't really trying to. I mean,
Mm,
I had a trans friend that I was really trying to help, and she sort of turned on me when I didn't give her work.
mm,
Um, I don't believe in defunding the police. I think that was a bad thing to say. Uh, and we all know that now. But I know we were really mad at the time too. And on social media, like I'm tempted to try to be the adult in the room,
mm,
as a village elder sometimes. Be like, God, guys, I'm a liberal too, but what are you doing here?
mm,
And that caused outrage. Like the outrage in my career has been stuff this hasn't been anything I've done in a book. It's been stuff that I've
right,
said on Twitter, which is why I quit, or even stuff
mm,
here.
mm,
It's better in a podcast because people can see you're joking and your
yeah,
inflection and all that stuff. But yeah, people that generate outrage just to get career traction is, I guess you can try, but eventually you need to have product that people want.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
like my friends who are LGBT or minorities, and they I don't like this expression, but they play that card a lot. Um,
mm,
to get hired. And I'm like, great. If I had a daughter who was gay and that was her thing, and she was going to get hired by Marvel to be a gay artist, I'd say, you know what? You've been marginalized for a while. It's your turn now. Go for it. Take every advantage you can, but you better be fucking good at it at some point.
mm,
And
yeah,
I think the goal I would tell her is, one day when you've had a career for 30 years, it's like a famous lesbian creator, maybe I don't think you should do LGBT panels anymore. I think you shouldn't want to be
mm,
known as a gay artist. I think you just be an artist, or
mm,
you're not black, you're a writer. That's the point. I think the goal of not seeing uh, race or gender anymore it's not important enough. Um,
mm,
and when people play those cards, you're making it important. And I know why they're
mm,
doing it. But at one point, like when things are fixed, for my
mm.
fictional lesbian daughter here, one day when it's equal, when lesbians have just as much privilege as straight white men, you're going to have to give that card up. You can't play it anymore, because
Mm,
it's going to be hard. The more you play that card, the more you're going to get used to it. And at some point, you're just going to have to be good at your job. And it's not going to matter that
right,
you're gay.
right, right.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's wise. I mean, I think that's yeah. I mean, I think this totally feeds into everything we talked about up to this point. At the end of the day, you have to be the guy who, you know, it goes back to your apprenticeship. You've done the work.
yeah,
You've just been grinding and doing the thing. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't. You can't control how people are going to respond to what you make.
yeah, yeah,
You have to like put your head down, make
yeah,
the thing that you feel called to make, do it to the best of your ability, and
yeah,
you know if crap arises, which
yeah,
with the internet it always kind of does, you can't control that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, they should teach a class in this. Like, I don't know, in high school, I'm sure they still teach health class, but I think part
Mm,
of health should be maneuvering social media and how to deal with bullies,
mm,
and being shamed by people who are posting pictures of themselves on vacation in infinity pools, who feel like they're living their best life. Meanwhile, you've got 3 kids. Like, how do you manage that stuff? I mean, it's hard, and I don't know if anyone's really teaching that. That's going to be the
right,
real struggle to stay healthy in all of this.
right. I agree.
Um,
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end. Sean, this has been a really, really fun conversation, man.
No, brother, I miss you. I want to see you face to face now. I feel like I've gotten to know you better through social media and phone calls lately. Um, so next time I see you at a show, you have to let me buy the first drink.
Okay, okay, I will do that, and I will let you know when we're in Maine because I will take you up on the on the house.
Please, absolutely, please do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, man, for being here,
All
and
right, man.
I'll see you soon, buddy.